I'm very happy to be here for lots of different reasons. Amongst other things, I really like the register, and I always have. I can't remember whether I actually cite it in this book. I did cite it in my previous book, and I do from time to time, because there's lots of really good stuff that I've learnt. And I think that's an important thing to say right from the start. For some weird reason, I was quoted as a law expert in The Guardian today when I was quoting something about freedom of information. Now, for those of people who do know me, freedom of information is not my subject. I am certainly not an expert. What I do think that I try to do is to connect things, to see how things link together, and to make sure that we understand the consequences of what we do in a broad rather than a narrow sense. And that's really where this book, my new book, comes into play. It's a new book, and it covers a wide area of subjects, many of which may not seem to be connected, but they are connected, and they're connected by a whole load of things. Partly they're connected because they're connected, and the whole thing is connected, but partly because the way that we need to think about them, we need to understand them all together. And this is the title of the book, The Internet, Warts and All, Free Speech, Privacy and Truth. And I have to say, when I conceived this book, this was before anything about fake news was in the news. When I came up with the concept, and I put in the proposal, this is an academic book, and they take bloody years to get published, from the proposal to the writing to so on. But I was aware that our concepts about what is true were dodgy. Our understanding of privacy and of free speech were kind of dodgy, and the way that they're all linked together is something that people didn't really understand. So there's the book. And this is what gave me the idea for the title, Oliver Cromwell. Now, you may not know, some of you may know what the origin of the term warts and all is. And this is, in fact, this particular portrait, which is actually about that size, it's a miniature, was the origin of the term warts and all, because Cromwell went to see the painter, Samuel Cooper, to have his portrait painted. And Cooper said, looking at Cromwell, you've got a horrible ugly wart here, you've got another one here, and you've got one here. Do you want me to edit the warts out, to paint you without the warts? You'll look a lot more handsome. And he said, reputedly, no, paint me warts and all. Meaning you've got to see the thing as it really is, with all the bad bits, not just the nice bits, not make it look prettier than it really is. Now, I've always known the origin, I've always been interested in it. I think in relation to the internet, it works both ways. What I mean by that is, sometimes we see just the pretty picture. Sometimes we see just the warts. We just see the bad bits. And if you've been listening to the Labour Party this last few days, you would know they seem to focus entirely on the bad bits, not on the good bits. What we need to do is get a more balanced picture and actually see all the things together. So why am I talking about free speech, privacy and truth together? Well, my contention in the book is that whenever you do something as a lawyer, as a policymaker, as a regulator, as a business that affects one of these, it has an impact on the others. Mess around with free speech, it's likely to have an impact on truth and on privacy. Mess around with privacy, it'll have an impact on free speech and on truth, and so on. And I give examples all the way through the book, and the ones we're going to talk about this evening are mostly fake news and trolling. But there are a couple of other things coming recently. The idea was, I started thinking about, why are we getting everything so badly wrong in terms of regulating the internet? Why have we always got it wrong in regulating the internet? And a lot of that is to do with myths that exist around how the internet works. And when I first started writing about this, I went after them one by one. A lot of it began when I was dealing with that lovely thing, the right to be forgotten, which fortunately most people have forgotten now because it's not nearly as important as it seems to be. But one of the things we talk about, I'm going to go through some of the kind of chapter titles of the book overall here. We imagine that everything is on the internet, when it's on the internet, is there forever. And it really isn't. It might be, and some of the bits that last for a long time are not the bits we want to last for a long time, but some things disappear right away. We have confusion over perfection. What I mean by that is sometimes we treat the internet as though everything on it is perfect and we should never mess around with it. And sometimes we treat it as if you can't believe anything on the internet and it's all complete lies. And we're very confused about when we should look at it one way and when we should look at it the other way. And then we have this one, and this is, I think, my favourite chapter in the book. The neutrality myth. And what I mean by that is we believe all kinds of things about neutrality that are just wrong. We believe that, for example, the organic, natural algorithms of Google are somehow neutral. We believe that Facebook is a neutral platform. We believe that Wikipedia is neutral. One of the 5 pillars of Wikipedia is the neutral point of view. And none of this is true. None of these things are neutral. Not only are they not neutral in practice, they can't be neutral. It's an illusion that they are ever neutral, and we need to understand that. I'm not going to talk much more about that. Then, again, this is another of my favourite chapters, Free Speech Fantasies. 2 fantasies about free speech. One, that people actually want it. Everyone says they like free speech, but when it comes down to it, they generally don't. And secondly, that we actually have it on the internet, because there are so many things that actually restrict our freedom of speech that it's hard to keep count of them. And yet everybody seems to imagine we have it completely. My old subject was privacy. And my chapter about misunderstanding privacy is a big one in the sense that I think it's the thing that we misunderstand the most. We don't understand what we even mean by privacy, and we don't understand when we should have privacy, how we should have privacy, who gets privacy in what way, and so on. And what I call, that chapter's actually called The 7 Myths of Surveillance. Actually, there are many more than 7. I'm not going to talk much about this, except that, again, I think our surveillance law is all wrong, largely because we believe things about surveillance that are simply not true. The one that seems to be coming up again and again, it actually came up while we were talking about WhatsApp, the owner of WhatsApp now feeling guilty about having sold it to Facebook. The idea that the content is what really matters rather than the metadata. It's in law all over the place, completely misleading. And then we get to the 2 I'm going to talk about today. Trolls, trolling, and this is called fighting fakery. It was actually a kind of double joke because the fakery is fighting as well as we're fighting it. This is about fake news and fake people and things like that, which I will talk about this evening. Trolls and fake news. But before that, I was going to amend this. There are actually 3 examples I'm going to give you from the last 2. Just things that have demonstrated to me that I'm not talking complete rubbish, because my 2 favourite things in the world, that is the Labour Party and the European Commission, have both demonstrated to me why it is that they really need to read my book. First one was Lucy Powell's hate speech proposal, which was, I don't know if you followed it closely, that essentially any group of larger than a certain number who has a private group chat, that group chat should not be private anymore. The platforms should expose it for everyone to see. Basically, we should have, there should be no privacy in large groups. Quite what that means is a little question. I was going to add to that Angela Rayner saying we should get rid of anonymity on the internet. And again, I'm going to talk specifically about anonymity later and why both of those are completely misguided. In these cases, these are supposedly things that are dealing with free speech, but actually they impact on privacy. And they use privacy to affect free speech and so on, and the impact on how truthful we are. Because if your privacy is invaded, you won't speak so freely and you won't necessarily speak the truth. And then the new EU Copyright Directive, Article 13. I don't know how many of you guys know about this. This is the one that was variously told it was going to destroy memes and it was going to require upload filters and things like that. The interesting thing is I did a tweet about it and the European Commission themselves tweeted to me about it, totally missing the point that I was making and misusing a meme in order to do so. Largely what they're actually doing is they are requiring platforms to prevent people uploading copyright infringing material. How are they going to do that? Basically by invading our privacy to know what we're uploading to start with and restricting our free speech by preventing us from using stuff that they think might be infringing. Privacy, free speech linked in a measure that is supposed to be to help truth, because one of the many supposed functions of copyright is to guarantee authenticity and hence truth, all linked together in a disastrous combination in this particular case. That's been through the Parliament. It's going back again in the spring, and I'm hoping that they'll see a little bit more sense before the spring, but it's just a question of hope. They've just demonstrated to me that actually one of the problem that I identify, which is that policymakers don't see the big picture because they don't understand the implications of what they're doing, is a really important one. We've seen it with the Labour Party. I'm fully expecting the Conservative Party conference to be full of similarly stupid proposals. Is it next week, the Conservative Party conference? Anyway, it's sometime very soon. It will have some hideously bad stuff for sure. So, let's talk about trolling. Is anyone here a troll ever? Yeah? When I talk about trolls, and I've studied trolling to quite some depth, there are two different ways of looking at trolls. And they reflect two different origin stories about what trolling is. One is that trolls are big, nasty monsters that go around on the internet doing horrible things. This is a picture from, in breach of copyright, from the Norwegian film Troll Hunter, which is an absolute classic which you should all watch if you get the chance. Trolls just as big, bad, nasty things. Trolls as monsters, identifying individuals as trolls that need to be somehow hunted down and got rid of. The second one, and it's a little bit hard to see on this screen, is the fishing version of trolling. Trolling is a style of fishing where you take a boat, you lay a line full of bait out the back of the boat, and you just travel along hoping that the fish bite on the line. You're not using any particular skill, you're laying the bait out and you're going along. Now, in this version, trolling is an activity. In this version, trolling is an identity. You are a troll, or you are trolling. And they mean rather different things. I do this sort of trolling quite a lot of the time. I did it today. I did a tweet about homework. I don't know if any of you follow me on Twitter. I did a tweet about homework, saying homework is great for helping the middle class to increase their advantage over everybody else. Was that trolling? Yeah. I wanted people to bite on it and get annoyed. Did they get annoyed? Yeah. Not that many. That was trolling. Is that bad? Should it be banned? Should I be hunted down for being an evil troll? If I do that, yes, yeah, maybe I should. If I do that when I'm talking about things like homework, that's fine. If I do that about Brexit, which I do quite a lot, is that also fine? If I go further into political stuff, I get slightly more contentious, I can get a little bit nastier. Where do you draw the line? How do you decide? And the thing is that when we try to deal with trolls, we might think we want to catch that or we want to stop that. What we actually end up doing, for those of you who don't have children, this is from the movie Trolls. The trolls are very cute. Actually, when you do measures to deal with this and this, you end up getting everybody else. And you also end up providing tools for the real trolls to get their victims. So, here are some trolls. Or are they? People recognise this guy? This is Milo Yiannopoulos, I can't pronounce his name properly, who defined himself as King Troll at one point. His autobiographical book, Dangerous, which I have read, so that you don't have to. He didn't exactly troll himself, but what he did was get other people to troll on his behalf. Effectively, he organised, encouraged, got his followers to do the bad stuff rather than him doing it himself. Is that bad? Yeah, maybe. Is it something that we need to ban? Hard. Or is it free speech? Is it something that just is part of what we do? What happened to him eventually is he got banned by Twitter. It was a little unclear why he got banned from Twitter. It was connected with the trolling of Leslie Jones, the Ghostbusters actress, who he encouraged people to basically attack in a racist and misogynistic way on a big scale. But it was not clear how and exactly what he did wrong that got him banned. And what we've seen since, lots of people get banned, lots of people don't. Who doesn't get banned? Donald Trump. Does he do worse things? Probably he does. Could they ban him? No. Here's the next one. Does anyone recognise her? Brenda Leyland. Close. Very close. Brenda Leyland. And this man here? He looks like Gordon Brown. It's actually Martin Brunt, who's from Sky News. So Brenda Leyland was a so-called McCann troll. That is, she was part of a campaign to, from her perspective, fight for the rights of Madeleine McCann, the toddler who disappeared. She is from a group who think that Madeleine McCann's parents were in some way responsible for their daughter's death. They assume she's dead. So what do? They go out and they talk about it all the time, and whenever something comes up in the news, they will go on about it and things like that. Are they trolls? Well, as far as the conventional media is concerned, yes, they were trolls. They were McCann trolls, and they were evil. And she was on Twitter using the name Sweepyface, which is anonymous, supposedly. But in one of the periodic kind of anti-troll campaigns in the conventional media, somebody found out who she was, identified her, and Martin Brunt doorstepped her. This is him doorstepping her at her home, finding out who she is and confronting her. 2 days after that, she was found dead in a hotel room. She committed suicide. And she committed suicide. It's a little bit unclear exactly why, but it was certainly connected with her being outed, named, and confronted for trolling. She was, in some ways, quite a disturbed individual, but her trolling was actually relatively mild. She didn't swear, she didn't attack, she didn't go after any individuals, and actually she got in touch with Martin Brunt because he started following her on Twitter, and she thought, great, somebody in the real news is interested in our campaign and will help us to get justice for Madeline.
How can you say she didn't attack anybody if she's after Madeline's parents?
She didn't go direct to them. They're not even on Twitter.
No, I didn't mean that, but you said she was trying to say they were responsible.
Yes, but she wasn't going after them. She was trying to get justice. She didn't specifically attack them as individuals. She didn't go after them. She said they were responsible in some way. She was going on. She didn't actually attack them directly in that way. Even she said we need to investigate it further and that sort of thing. But she didn't specifically attack them. And conventionally, when we talk about trolling of individuals, we mean direct attacks. And the law dealing with trolling is mostly about communication to two people, Malicious Communications Act and so on, or direct things like that.
But isn't libel there? I mean, she effectively was libeling.
She could have been challenged under libel law for sure, but nobody did challenge her for libel law at all. And the result was she died. But what's interesting, and the reason I asked this question, who's trolling who, is that the tactics of Martin Brunt and Sky News are actually almost identical to the tactics of trolls attacking victims. Try to identify the victim, dox the victim to find out their real name, because actually this is like a doxing event. You show them for who they are. You locate them. You encourage other people to come in on them, which is essentially what happened to them. So who's the troll here? She died. And there are many people still upset about what happened to her, and there should have been more understanding and more responsibility from the media. Media have ethics. How do you make sure that the ethics, how do you translate that to the ethics of trolls? So, regardless of that, those are just two examples. There is a lot of actually seriously nasty stuff that goes on. How do you deal with the nasty stuff? Well, there are numbers of approaches that we have, and Angela Rayner came up with the real names one again. Now, there are several. The logic behind the real names thing as a solution to trolling is fairly direct. The idea is, if you have to do it in your own name, you won't be so aggressive, you won't be so nasty, and you won't do it if your mother knows that you're doing it, is one of the arguments. And it's quite a seductive argument, really. It has two problems. I'm sorry, I'm going to move on. So it has two problems, the real name solution. One, that for many people who are not trolls, having to operate under their real names causes them a lot of problems. Whistleblowers, victims of domestic abuse. Just two of the examples. People in dissidents in oppressive regimes. One of the funniest examples is J.K. Rowling, who, when she wrote her thrillers under the name of Robert Galbraith, she specifically did not want people to know it was her, so that her books would be judged on their quality, not because they were by her. And it was a friend of a friend at a dinner party who revealed that it really was her, and immediately the sales went through the roof, and she was very upset. There are many people who need or want to operate without their real names. The other one is actually a little bit more worrying, and that is that the evidence suggests that when you use real names, it doesn't stop people trolling. Actually, the opposite. The largest study of the subject shows that people where they have to use their real names are more aggressive and more showy and more generally nasty in their trolling. We're not sure why. Ideas have been that it's kind of like a badge of honour, that it's somehow something to be proud that you're a great big evil troll. Other that they've kind of lost that sense of shame that might be there, that they might be exposed, so they go out and become more aggressive. Either way, it's really not at all clear that real names will help, and for many people it causes a big disaster. One of the other things with real names is, how do you judge what is a real name? And we have the old story of Salman Rushdie, who was banned from Facebook because they didn't believe it was the real him. He said, hang on, this is me. They said, okay, prove it, show us your passport. He showed them his passport, and they said they brought him back, but they called him Ahmed Rushdie because his real name in his passport is Ahmad Salman Rushdie. And he said, hang on, I'm not Ahmed, I'm Salman. And they said, no, you're not, your passport says you're Ahmed. Because he's a famous person, he was able to persuade them to change. But for other people, it's much, much harder. Anyway, I can go on about that for a long time. There's quite a lot in the book about real names. Surveillance is the other method here, and this is kind of a little bit connected with what Lucy Powell was suggesting from the Labour Party. That is, we need to watch everybody and monitor everything, and then we can catch the trolls while they're trolling. Now, several problems with that. One is, it's not that easy to do surveillance on that scale. And the other is, surveillance has its other harms and dangers connected to it. Many of them. You can do it automatically, and then you get all kinds of interesting algorithmic problems. You can do it manually, and it's huge amounts of manpower, energy needed. And if you've recently seen Facebook, they're now being sued by one of their content monitors for basically trauma, for having to watch all these beheading videos and things like this. And part of the reason for that is because they have to do so much. It's almost impossible to give people the time they need to do it. Here's another one, and this is the traditional one. Blame the social media providers. They're really clever, those people at Facebook and Twitter. If they could be bothered, they'd be able to solve this. This is kind of a fairly common refrain from the politicians. One of the reasons they don't is because it's really hard. How can you detect what bit is trolling? We have faster and better reporting of abuse. Yes, we do. I don't know about the rest of you, but I use the report abuse button a lot. Why? Because I want to test it. I want to see whether it actually works. And maybe it does, but it's so difficult to get them one by one to actually deal with any problems. Banning of trolls. Well, some of this happens automatically. It's quite interesting. I have a verified Twitter account, one of those blue ticks, and there was a system set up for a while, it doesn't seem to be operating anymore, where if you swore at somebody with a blue tick, you would be automatically locked out for 12 hours. Great. But it gives a huge amount of extra power to the people who are already powerful. Banning the Nazis. This is a constant refrain on Twitter. Why don't you ban all the Nazis? And they are starting to ban a few Nazis. But if you ban Nazis, who else do you ban? How do you decide who are the people you're going to ban and when you're going to ban them? Who decides? And this is where you get back to the Milo situation. Who banned Milo? Why was he banned? Well, the only people who banned it was Twitter. Why? Well, they have control. Because it's their system. They have the right to ban whoever they want to when they want to. One of the other glorious ideas at the Labour Party conference was that we should have a public interest version of Google created by Momentum, as far as I can tell. And when I kind of did a little Twitter facepalm at this suggestion, I actually got challenged on it by some of my Labour Party people. Why am I objecting to this? Well, there are many reasons I'm objecting to it, but one is it won't work. And that's one of the biggest problems with all of this. All of this stuff can do a little bit, but it can't do very much. And most importantly, all of these tools are double-edged swords. And what do I mean by that? If you are a troll of the monster variety rather than the phishing variety, and you've selected your victim, what's the best way to deal with that victim? Get them banned as a troll. You accuse them of abusing you. You tease them into saying something that can get them banned. You persuade them to say something that you know goes against the terms and conditions. And if you're good at gaming systems, you can find a way to do that. The old flame wars from years and years ago were working exactly that kind of way. You know what the rules are, you get other people to break them, and you then win. We'll talk about winning much more. I'm going to talk a little bit here about trolling and free speech. See, this is where the bottom line comes. Trolls will all say, or most of them will say, I'm just exercising my free speech. And to some degree that is true. But in effect, often they are also restricting other people's free speech. Why? How? Several different ways. One of the great victories of certain groups of trolls is see if they can get those snowflakes to delete their accounts. Yeah? And if you've ever been attacked seriously on Twitter, it's only happened to me a couple of times, the first tendency is, oh God, turn it all off and go away. And when it's horrible, you want to do that. The other thing is, again, if you want to ban people, that's a great way to do it. If you can persuade people to leave, that's a great way to do it. If you make the environment so hostile that they don't even want to go there, is that restricting their free speech? Not technically, but in practice, they don't speak. By getting their own real name, their own pseudonyms, and allowing them to be anonymous, are they requiring their own privacy? Well, yes, they are. But by identifying people and doxing people, if you don't know what doxing is, it's finding out all the information you can about people and then publicizing it, so that other people will do attacks of various different kinds, or even swatting. People know about swatting. Finding where somebody lives and telling the police that something bad's going on there, so the police go and send a SWAT team over to do it. And this is not just mythical, it does actually happen. I don't know if it's ever happened in the UK, but it happens, and I'm not aware of it happening in the UK, but it happens in the US. But doxing is a fairly classic thing. They're invading people's privacy. Are they exposing the truth? Yes?
Just a question on that. The first example was where somebody, by exercising their free speech, in particular maybe saying it's restricting someone else's free speech, actually by intimidating them on.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're exercising their own right to privacy by remaining private, but doxing themselves is a completely separate act. You're not restricting somebody else's privacy by exercising your privacy.
No. I don't mean by exercising your privacy, but you are. They are two different things, but they're different sides of the same. The concept of privacy. They are saying, I want my privacy. I don't want you to have your privacy. I'm not trying to suggest the two are linked any further than that. Illuminating the Truth. Now, if you spend time in it, again, if you read, I'm not recommending it, if you read Milo's book, he thinks what he's doing is exposing the truth of the world, which is that it's run by feminazis and the media, the liberal media elite who are preventing us from telling the truth about the oppression of men and so forth. And they seriously do think that that's what they're doing. Or are they undermining truth by the spreading of fake and related news? And this is where I link from trolls to fake news. I can go on. I realise I'm going to be running over time here. First thing to say about fake news. When I started studying fake news, I was very interested. Is this a new phenomenon? Because the first time it got mentioned in the current era was, as I said, after I'd started writing this book, after I put the proposal in. 2016 was the first recent mention of fake news. But the more I researched it, the more clear it became this isn't a new problem at all. So here's a little bit of history. Does anyone recognise who this guy is? Vlad Cepes, yes. I should say I have a Romanian wife, so I have a strong connection with Vlad. Vlad Cepes, that is Vlad the Impaler. How do we get from that to that?
Whitby fish and chips.
With the fish and chips. Well, Vlad Dracul, that's his family name. Cepes is the nickname which means the Impaler. Part of the way you got from one to the other was fake news. And this is a bit of fake news from 15th century Wallachia. Well, actually, this was from 15th century Transylvania. Vlad was not from Transylvania. He was from Wallachia, but which is one of the other principalities in what is now Romania. He had a lot of enemies, did Vlad. And one of the groups of enemies were the German merchants, the ethnically German merchants in Transylvania, who were upset because he was ethnically Romanian and he was actually supporting the ethnic Romanians against the ethnic Germans in Transylvania. So they started creating fake news about him. Now, you may see this one. I can't remember whether I put the detail. Here's the detail. Here is Vlad sitting having his dinner while there are people impaled on sticks just next to him. And look, he's happy, he's smiling, he's really enjoying having his dinner while all these people are being impaled. Did this happen? Almost certainly not. Did he impale people? Yes, that's why he got the nickname. Was he more evil and brutal than the other people at the time? Almost certainly not. He was quite effective at it. He was a very effective ruler in lots of ways. But this sort of thing didn't happen. But the German merchants wanted people to not support him. This was after Vlad had died that they produced this stuff, but they were wanting to blacken his memory to cement their hold over Transylvania. Now, this is a woodcut. Hard work to make a woodcut, and they were made into these hand-printed leaflets with a bit of text on the top and the pictures, because many people were illiterate, so they couldn't read them, but you had the picture to illustrate it, and they were handed out amongst people in the towns in Transylvania to try to blacken his name. They had a specific political agenda to push, and they used the mechanism that they had at the time to do so. Now, Vlad had enemies of various other kinds as well. His enemies in the Hungarian court, who he had insulted the King of Hungary because he had effectively tried to get the King of Hungary to join him, Vlad, in fighting the Turks. And the King of Hungary didn't really want to, so he suggested Vlad was a bad guy in lots of other ways. He had enemies in the Russian Orthodox monasteries because Vlad converted from Orthodox to Catholic, partly because it was in a political attempt to get the Hungarians, who were Catholic, to work with him, which failed. And he had enemies in the Turkish court because he beat the Turks at war many, many times, and they wanted to suggest it was because he was in league with the devil, amongst other things, which is the only reason he managed to beat them. So they all created news stories about him in different ways, all of which made him seem really bad. And then you get right to the Bram Stoker story, Dracula, turning him into the actual vampire, which was built on the earlier stories about Vlad the Impaler as being a really bad guy. And the fact that Bram Stoker had Hungarian heritage is part of the reason that he saw Vlad as a bad guy. Anyway, that's Vlad. Here's somebody else.
So you're saying Whitby is completely innocent, taking the ship and the coffin?
I'm afraid so, yeah. Whitby, it's all made up. Whitby, there is no evidence that Vlad went anywhere near Whitby at any time. But there's actually some relevancy. Cardinal Mazarin, this is. He was a victim of fake news in 17th century France. In 17th century France, these guys, colporteurs, used to sing the fake news in the street. And they wrote little leaflets that they sold to people here. This guy Theodore Fontaine. Those of you who are interested in 19th century German novels, very, very famous 19th century German novelist, but novelists don't make much money. They certainly didn't then. In his day job really, he was a newspaper correspondent. And one of his most famous stories is from this. This is the Tule Street fire in London. And he wrote a wonderful story about the Tule Street fire, first-hand evidence of having been there, lots of interviews with all the people involved and so on. The only problem was he never crossed the channel. He was never in London, never anywhere near Tule Street or anything like that. In 19th century Germany, a whole genre of fake foreign correspondence existed. Because the German newspapers couldn't afford to send people over there, but people expected it because the telegraph was, I don't mean the Daily Telegraph, the telegraph had been invented that allowed you to send news. And they expected it. So to save money, they just invented it. They just wrote fake stories which were woven around events they knew had happened, using stock characters and all kinds of fake things, very similar to the fake news we get now, but to suggest a particular agenda. Now with Fontaine and the 19th century Germans, there were two things going on at once. They were trying to make money, but they were also trying to push particular political agendas of the owners of the newspapers. And that's part of the problem with fake news. So we have two things going on at once. One is the actual fake news, a false story, something that didn't happen. The other is a fake narrative, a storyline, a political agenda that you want to push by the selective use of news to support it. Examples include, with our lovely Brexit stuff, the agenda that immigrants are coming over here and using the health service. And the story of health tourism. That's just one example. Actual evidence suggests it's so small as to be negligible, but you can create the narrative that it's happening by weaving some real stories with some fake stories and creating a false narrative. And it's the same back to Vlad. The false narrative is Vlad was in league with the devil and was the most evil man of all time. You use some real events and you use some fake events and you create a narrative to support it. And the thing that you can recognize through history is that what people use is what's available at the time. So back in Vlad's time, woodcut pamphlets, 17th century France, songs and the plays. You see, Shakespeare, Richard III, fake news. Printed leaflets, newspaper reports, the radio, things like Hanoi Hannah, Lord Haw Haw. A lot of them were news events, supposedly, using the radio to try to spread the news, and even down to the lovely comical Ali in the Iraq War sending fake news reports using television, because that was the medium of the time. Now, and this is where things get more interesting, we have social media. We have Facebook. And this is where the interesting comes here. And I know it's an old joke, Facebook. The point being that social media is ideal for fake news. And all the things that have gone on in the past can go on much better now. Why? Well, firstly, you can identify issues that people were interested in. And one of the really interesting things is that the first modern fake news in 2016 was Macedonian teenagers doing stories to get about Donald Trump and related Donald Trump's stuff. It was nothing to do with getting him elected. They didn't care whether he got elected. They were just wanting clicks. And they identified this as a rich vein of places that they could get clicks because people were interested in it. And they could get clicks, and that meant they get ads and they get money and so on. It was about making money. And they found that out effectively through data mining. You then can use, having data mined, you can then use profiling to identify who are the people that you want to send this news to, and then you can actually directly target it through Facebook. The other thing that Facebook does that's so good for fake news is it makes creating it incredibly easy. Making a woodcut pamphlet about Vlad the Impaler was bloody difficult. You needed a craftsman to do it, you need an artist to draw it, a craftsman to create it, you then needed to print it, you can create a Facebook page in moments. And what's more, a Facebook page created in moments looks just the same as one created by a major news provider. It's really easy to do. And of course it's really easy to share because that's how Facebook works. Sharing is caring and so on. And because of all the stuff you've done here, you know where you can seed it so that it will be shared more often. And the other thing to say is that it works. And what do I mean by that? Well, there are theoretical reasons why fake news can be more believable than real news. And there are several different reasons this works. One is that the story you create in fake news won't have plot holes in it. You know, you can make it a coherent story much more than the real news is often very incoherent. You don't actually, because you don't know everything, it can feel like it doesn't make sense. You can make sure it makes sense. More importantly, because you know what the prejudices are of the people that you're aiming it at, you can make it likely to fit in with their prejudices and then therefore more believable. And that brings on to the second thing. We have empirical evidence that it is believed more often than real news. This one's a little bit more awkward. It's easy to assume that people want to find the truth, but it's not actually clear that they really do. Very often they just want to win an argument. They want to find the stuff that bolsters their existing position, that supports what they believe to be true. It's not that they're seeking something that's false exactly, but that they can find the stuff that suits their prejudices. And then they can use it to win an argument. Anyone who's had arguments on Twitter, prove it. Here's a link. I've proved it. I've won. And this is where it gets even more disturbing. There is evidence that even looking at a headline makes you more likely to believe it. And looking at repeated headlines makes it even more likely. And the deliberate creators of fake news want to know that, so they will send different varieties of the same story to back it all up, to make it all work. And this is one, I think I was mentioning to a few people at the beginning. Threatening content is more often shared than non-threatening content. Now we kind of know this. Spectacular news is bigger news. But we have empirical evidence to show it on Facebook. People will share content that has threatening bits in it more often than otherwise. And then when you get to Facebook itself, you get to see how it's actually effective. Now, some of you may remember the emotional contagion experiment, 2014. 700,000 people. They manipulated their timelines. They divided into 3 groups. One group, they promoted the happy stuff and demoted the sad stuff. Second group, they promoted the sad stuff and demoted the happy stuff. And the third group, they demoted both the happy and sad stuff and left the emotionally neutral stuff at the top. And then they measured whether people were happier or sadder afterwards. Now, in all these cases, they were using sentiment analysis, algorithmic analysis of the content of the stuff that they're shared, and then of their stuff afterwards. Yes, it's not very reliable, but it's probably reliable enough to at least get to take some conclusions of it. So the results were, promote the happy stuff, demote the sad stuff, people got happier. Promote the sad stuff, demote the happy stuff, people get sadder. And that made quite a lot of headlines. But people missed the third group. The people who had their happy and sad stuff demoted and the neutral stuff promoted, the result for them was they spent less time on Facebook and they engaged less with Facebook. They did fewer things. So what does that do? Well, it creates for Facebook an incentive for emotionally charged content. Now, I don't know whether Facebook does that, but there's an incentive there. And an incentive for the creators of content that they want shared. For anyone who read that survey, that study, they know the more emotional it is, the more likely it is to be enjoyed. Facebook also demonstrated that they get people to register to vote more and to actually vote more. Both of these in the US. And in the US it makes a bit more difference. They also demonstrated the effectiveness of racial affinity groups. Well, what do we mean by racial affinity groups? The most direct demonstration of this was with the trailers for the movie Straight Outta Compton. They made 3 versions of the trailers. One for African Americans, one for white Americans, and one for Hispanic Americans. The ones for African Americans assumed they knew about NWA, didn't give any background. The ones for the white Americans, they assumed they didn't know, so gave them much more background and didn't emphasize the race stuff so much. And the Hispanic ones they put Spanish subtitles. And they targeted these things at people based on profiling for their racial affinity. You couldn't racially profile people, but you could profile what race they are showing affinity with. And it worked. As far as the producers of the movie were concerned, they were incredibly happy with it. It seemed to be very effective. Then another thing they're experimenting with, real-time targeting of vulnerable people. This was most directly in Australia. They actually, there was a memo that was leaked from Facebook Australia where they were advertising to people, we can help you target young people at the precise moment when they're feeling vulnerable. Now Facebook's saying, it's because we can get support. We can give them support. We can help them. They didn't quite notice that you could do some rather bad things if you know people, when people are vulnerable, you can take advantage of them and so on. So what's the impact of all this? Well, the impact of all of this is that fake news is easy to do on Facebook, and we can at least believe that it has an effect. The level of effect is still open to question, but it does seem to be getting better all the time. We shall see whether they ever determine whether the interference had any effect on any of these elections, but we know that people take it seriously enough to invest a lot of money in getting it to work. And it's not just Facebook, because these same business models apply throughout social media. And YouTube is perhaps the richest area for fake news in lots of interesting ways. And it came out with 2 of the big shootings in the US last year, one in Las Vegas, the other in Texas, that within a day of the shootings happening, the things that were appearing top of the search list in YouTube were false flag stories, entirely fake, about both shootings. And specifically they found out that there were people who were creating them who were working out, who were gaming the algorithm to find a way to get their stuff to the top. Anyone who's followed this for years, the idea of search engine optimization is a long-standing industry. The idea being you work out how a search engine works, you will get your stuff to the top. Great. The same applies for fake news. And the gaming of algorithms is a big, big challenge. How do we deal with it? So, fake news, I don't think, is going away. Why do I think it's not going away? Well, mostly because it's so easy to do, and there are so many incentives to do it. You can make money out of it because you'll get clicks, you'll get advertising around it. You can at least believe that you have a political effect. Again, it's still questionable whether it, how strong it is, but we'll see. But I think more importantly, because It's just using the systems the way they're intended to be used. And the only way to stop it will be to stop the systems being used the way that they're intended to be used. To stop people data mining, profiling, targeting. To stop people sharing stories. How can you have Facebook if you don't allow people to share stories? And there we have the question. There are these bad things. I've talked mostly about the warts, but you have to see the warts in context. You have to see that fake news is part of a bigger picture of enabling freedom of speech, enabling people to communicate in ways that they've never done, they've never had the opportunity before. The only way you could shut down fake news would be effectively to massively limit the way that Facebook itself works. Is the existence of something like Facebook is the existence of fake news a price worth paying for the benefits we get from social media? And until we start seeing it in context, I don't think we're going to be able to help it. And I think we're going to go do the usual government overreactions and stupid things that will actually not deal with fake news, but will block our ability to communicate. I've just the last bit, because I know I'm running over time. What I talk about in the end of my book is not recipes for saving the internet, because there aren't any. What we can do is try to manage the situation a little better and try to not overreact. So I have 3 rules of thumb. What you see isn't what you get. Stop believing what you're told quite so obviously. That's us. We need to be a bit cleverer. Stop looking for silver bullets to solve problems. And the analogy I make, silver bullets are great for killing werewolves, but you get shot with a silver bullet as a human, that's going to kill you too. Silver bullets get rid of the good guys as well as the bad guys. Challenge sacred cows. Now, this is something I talk about quite a lot. And many people will claim, it's my freedom of speech, when actually they're just using it as a cover for some other thing. We need to be willing to say, actually, you've got to be daring enough to look. Don't be afraid of giants. And I mean internet giants, but I also mean government giants. We've got to be willing to say, if the government says this is a good idea, no, just no. And that's what I want to say to the European Commission about the Article 13 of the Copyright Act. Just no. It's just not a good idea. And this is perhaps my biggest one. Don't give more power to the powerful. And you will see, and I mentioned a number of times in my book, many of the solutions to the problems of Facebook and of Google, I haven't talked much about Google, but they're deep in this. It's their birthday, isn't it? Is it today that their 20th birthday? Many of the solutions to their problems, at least the ones that they suggest, actually involve giving more power to them. Facebook's solution to revenge porn, you've heard this one? What you should do is upload to Facebook all the naked pictures you've ever taken of yourself so that Facebook has it on a database in case anyone else uploads them, and they can be automatically matched and got rid of. 1 or 2 little problems with that. But we should always watch this. Whenever there are solutions suggested, particularly by Google and Facebook, they generally involve giving more data or more power to Google and Facebook. And almost all swords are double-edged. Whenever we think we're trying to solve one problem, it can be used, often in exactly the same situation, to do something the other way. And this is perhaps my favourite one. Make sure you have a long enough spoon. For those who don't understand that one, this is the old saying, if you sup with the devil, make sure you have a long spoon. Our problem is very often that when we're dealing with people who we should be very wary of, we let ourselves get drawn in too easily, and then we can't find a way out. We need to be much more careful about that, and that's in relation to different devils in different situations.